Hey guys, Phil Baumhart here. So today I'm at the Port Huron Museum, and they've been kind enough to let me into the vault where they have a bunch of little swords and edged weapons and some rifles. So they let me take a look at them, and I'm gonna bring you along for the ride and show you what they got. Like this D-guard here was exciting to see. You know, you guys know that I make D-guards quite a bit, so it's nice to actually get my hands on an actual one. Yeah, it's right off the bat, it's real lightweight. It's got a 20-inch blade, 26 inches overall. It's got a really neat distal taper, so it starts off 9 millimeters thick here and goes all the way down to 0 right here. And yeah, this is probably blacksmith-made. I know these are popular around the Civil War, but we don't really know where this one came from. But it's also interesting, it's got a recurve. You know, you kind of get like a kukri belly there, and it goes to a super fine point. It's got some nicks, probably kids sword fighting in the backyard or something like that. But yeah, real neat. Let's get on the table. I'll show you some more details.
All right, so here's a look at the handle. Looks like a sort of like a thin sort of a sheet metal type guard. The handle is mostly oval, but it kind of comes to this kind of point here, so you get actually pretty decent indexing. And it looks like they cut some decoration into the handle itself, probably with a file. There's the peen on the tang holding it all together, so it's still got a rock solid fit after all these years. You got ferrules on either end, and there's some of that battle damage. Yeah, just a full flat grind. You can see that taper. There's what the point looks like. Really fine stabby point. Definitely a neat design. Yeah, for me personally, this is just kind of one of my favorites of the museum here, just because of its connection to what I do and what I make. But yeah, this is well made. This is a rock solid fit up. You can just sharpen it up and it can still go right to work.
Yeah, I'm here with Andrew, one of the curators. Is that correct?
I am, so technically on my business card, the community engagement manager, but do a little bit of everything, kind of the de facto historian here. So
okay, right on. Yeah, so they've for some reason let me look at some of the swords and knives and guns that they have here, and
yeah, so we've got a pretty extensive collection of kind of a mishmash of swords, but my favorite of all of the swords is actually the one right down here, and this is something that belonged to John Peacock. So this sword right here dates to the War of 1812. It's actually a 1796 pattern cavalry saber, but officers were using this well. John Peacock was actually in the infantry, and we're fortunate that his name is actually inscribed on the scabbard itself. Right. So that's how we know exactly whose this was. The sword itself's got that nice, real saber curve to it. So the sabers were becoming really popular at that time, around the turn of the 19th century, especially for cavalry officers. The idea is you're up on your cavalry troopers. You're up on your horse. You can kind of make a slashing motion with that and follow through. Yeah. Especially for a lot of cavalry, they're being used to run down infantry. So somebody's kind of running away from you, or you're chasing them. So that kind of slash motion really lent itself to a saber, but officers scared him because they look cool. Yeah. It looks really dashing to be able to pull out a saber to do all of your kind of ceremonial salutes and things like that. So this one is particularly well decorated. It's really based exactly on a British design from the 1790s during the Napoleonic War. But this one, like I said, belonged to John Peacock, and this was probably made, it's kind of hard to tell if this was made in the United States or one of the small batch that was actually purchased from England in that era between the Revolution and the War of 1812. Okay. But, some nice checkering on the grip. That's another dead giveaway that this was, an officer's saber rather than just your regular cavalry trooper. as well. But we know he was stationed at Fort Gratiot in 1817, just after the end of the War of 1812 in 1850, early 1815. And so they kept a lot of troops on the border in those couple of years right after the war. And so it's one of the best artifacts that we have that ties to the fort and to even a specific individual, which is always really exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely a badass looking sword, and it's interesting that the infantry officer wanted a cavalry sword, probably just on looks alone.
Yeah, and there's nothing saying you can't use one of those.
Right.
You know, if you got into it fencing it, but obviously officers are primarily using them for ceremonial purposes. But even in 1812, you never know what you're going to get
Absolutely.
into. So,
well, I mean, with officers at the time, wasn't the sword kind of considered the primary arm?
yeah, so they're not anybody above lieutenant. They're not carrying typically a fusel, is what they might deem it. Every once in a while, you'll see one that are kind of a higher class of typically a rifle, when most soldiers were carrying a smoothbore weapon, and it would kind of be up to the officer at the officer's discretion. But primarily, almost all of the officers are training and using swords at that time period, because it's not their job to necessarily get in the trenches. It's your job to order everybody else to, right?
So if you had to fight, this is a hell of a sword to do with it. Like, it's real lightweight, feels good in the hand, and I mean, if you connect with it, it's going to do
for sure
some devastating damage. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for showing me that. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the handle is wood, probably like an ebony or some sort of dark hardwood like that. Got a little bit of crude engravings on the back strap here. Kind of the penny scroll, half penny scroll guard. Still got a strong fit up, even though it seems like it's sort of coming apart, coming loose here, but still a good fit on this. Nice deep fuller. That's what keeps it lightweight.
Yeah, so one of the arms, the only firearm we have here on the table, is a great example of a classic American firearm. This is a Springfield 4570. So these date to, they were manufactured between 1873, 1892 or so. So only about a 20-year time period, relatively limited, but they made close to 500,000 of them. They churned these out by the tens of thousands. And they're actually based originally on the Springfield rifle that was being used, like a model 1861 Springfield rifle, which of course was percussion cap. But in the 1860s, the 1870s, the big innovation in the world of firearms was the metallic cartridge.
Yeah.
So self-contained cartridge. It has your primer, it has the powder, it has your projectile, all in a modern bullet. This is just like what we think of today, the cartridge. Granted, they are using black powder rather than smokeless, so you do get a big plume of black powder when you fire one of these, but it's a lot more convenient. It's not a muzzle loader. This was the very first breech loading weapon ever issued by, well, not ever issued, but for their mainline soldiers. There's always an exception kind of add to everything.
Gotcha.
But a breech loading rifle like this, the Army, a soldier would be capable of firing 12 or 13 rounds in a minute with one of these, which is a lot faster than the 2 or 3, maybe 4 rounds you might get with a muzzle loader.
Right.
So a huge leap forward in firearms technology. And it's amazing the United States government was reusing things like the hammer and the lock, because a lot of those springs were interchangeable with the older equipment. But by cutting that specialty breech block, they call them sometimes a trapdoor Springfield, that trapdoor opens up, which allows you to insert one cartridge at a time, close it up, fire. And when you open that trapdoor, it ejects the old case. But being a rifle, accurate out to hundreds of yards, soldiers in the 1880s using these were routinely taking target practice at ranges out to 1,000 yards. Marksmanship was actually very important to the United States Army in the 1880s and 90s, and they produced some of the best shots anywhere on Earth at that time was the U.S. Army. They really put an emphasis on marksmanship.
Hell yeah.
And this was the equipment to do it with.
All right, well, thank you so much for letting me take a look at these. I'm probably going to
Absolutely
poke around a little bit more, but thank you so much, sir.
Our pleasure.
So they have a pair of British naval cutlasses. These are known as double disc or figure of 8 type cutlasses because of the unique design of the knuckle guard. They both have a interesting cipher on the ricasso of a crown and the number 9, which to the best of my knowledge is a proof mark that denoted that the cutlasses were government owned, and based on the table I found, they may indicate that these were made in 1777. But it's difficult to be sure of their exact age. This design of cutlass came into use in the mid-1700s,
And by 1804, the British Sea Service had adopted a standard issue pattern, which looks very similar but has a distinct texturing on the grip. So if I had to guess, I would say these were made before 1804. But again, difficult to say. You can see this type of guard offers really good hand protection, almost completely covering the top of the hand. The guard itself is sheet steel. It's got a little curl, and you can see how this cutlass got its name by the round disc on the very front of the guard. And by looking on the inside of the guard, it looks to me like there was a forge weld used in the construction. There might also be another weld for the pommel piece, and you can see there the peened tang. The handle is a cylindrical piece of iron, either hollow or with a wooden mandrel in the center. This was done presumably for cost-saving purposes, but on a ship I guess it would make sense because the iron's going to have a little more durability against salt corrosion versus something leather or wood. So it's obviously not the best shape for edge alignment, but it's a very rugged and cost-effective design. So here's another British cutlass. This is a 1845 pattern, which was the standard issue replacement of the 1804. This one has been blunted at the tip, possibly for training or maybe for theatrical stage combat use. You can see a fairly thick spine, but a very deep fuller allows it to come to a fine edge. This one has even better hand protection with the large bell guard. There's a flare at the end of the knuckle guard, as well as a small slit at the bottom. This, as well as the grooves on the grip, are key giveaways that this is an 1845 pattern. And they've also got another little D-guard, which, again, this one has got a rounded point. This one's just kind of like a pretty big slab of steel. It seems to be thickest in the center here and tapers off either direction. So this one might have been designed just as like a theater saber or something like that. Slightly oval handle, kind of comes to a point there, so not too uncomfortable, but real forward heavy. This one I'm guessing was not a fighting weapon, but more of a prop. But interesting scabbard, wood core scabbard, center stitched with this kind of built up leather concho, which is neat. So here's a look at their collection of sabers. We'll start with this one with its distinct brass guard. It clearly looks to me like a British 1751 infantry hanger, which was a pattern of short sword issued during the 7 Years' War as well as the American Revolution. The guard was a little small for my hand. It rubbed the top two of my knuckles. It looks like the very tip of the blade has broken off, but just like all the swords here, it has a very thick spine at the base of the guard, but it has a continual distal taper that goes all the way to the point. So now we'll get into some swords from the American Civil War. The first one being a model 1840 artillery saber, a simple design but actually a very comfortable sword to hold. It has a cast brass guard and then brass wire wrapped over the leather on the grip. It has a thick blade but a very deep fuller and actually keeps the blade very lightweight. And you can see the scabbard here is entirely made of steel. They also have two model 1860 light cavalry sabers. They're both stamped 1864. This one as well has the government inspection initials of Charles E. Wilson. The grips on these swords are quite large, probably wood wrapped with leather. At least to me, not as comfortable as the artillery saber. The museum has a few leather scabbards for some of these other ones, but they're in such a fragile condition that I really didn't want to risk touching them. This next one is a model 1840, which was the forerunner of the 1860 we just looked at. This one probably belonged to an officer who paid extra when he had this blade commissioned because it's got some extra decorations in the casting on the guard, and it's also got a shark skin rather than leather grip wrapped with gilded brass wire. The blade itself is also highly decorated with some beautiful acid etching. This one is marked N.P. Ames, which was a common sword manufacturer out of Massachusetts at the time. And this final saber on the table looks like another officer's saber because you can see the well-worn sharkskin grip. This one looks to me like an 1850 pattern of foot officer saber. One thing interesting to note is that just about all these swords have got nicks for making edge-to-edge contact with other swords. But since 0.05% of wounds caused during the Civil War battles were caused by swords, it seems unlikely to me that this would be genuine battle damage. Now, I could be wrong, but it seems a little more likely that these are caused by grandkids sword fighting in the backyard. These blades have been around longer than their actual service life, so we'll never know exactly where these blades have been or what action they've seen, but it's always fun to speculate. I almost forgot about this one. This, I think, would be considered a backsword because it's got its edge on the front as well as the back. I'm not sure if this is a steel or brass guard, but you can see it's asymmetrical, so it only covers the outside of the hand, so when it's sheathed, it's not poking into you. Yeah, peened over tang. It's nice to, it might not be in focus, but it's nice to kind of see that. You get the full back strap, some wire wrapping here. But even for how long this is, really light. You know, it's still got its flex and temper, still straight. So need to get my hands on these and just see how they feel. Came with a little scabbard, some more decorative leather work at the top there. Yeah, again, this is going to be a wood core center stitch sheath, so only a little bit remains. Yeah, the leather sheaths do not fare too well over the years, but yeah, neat sword. You know, based on all my research, this has been a difficult sword to place because of the design on the guard, especially where it meets the tang there at the bottom. It looks like some kind of variation of the 1882 French infantry officer saber. But from looking at different antique auction sites, I'm also finding Confederate sabers that are very similar, not exactly the same. So I'm not really comfortable stating with any definitiveness what this sword is, but it's a really nice blade, handles very well. So if anyone has any better guess of what this is, feel free to let me know down in the comments. And then here's a really interesting knife. This one doesn't, again, no information about its maker origin, but if I had to guess, I would definitely say Blacksmith-made. I mean, you got this crazy deep recurve, comes back out to a probably what was a fine point. Actually, looks like it's not broken. That was just how that was, just how that one was made. Really thick spine. I mean, that's, but it's still, again, distal taper. It looks like it could have been set up as a Bowie type point, but just left blunt. But really neat design, and there we go. And so where you can see where the handle is broken away, you can see the tang is exposed there. Oval handle with that kind of spiral shape cut into it, probably with like a saw. Brass pommel with a peen over. And you can see that that's not perfectly centered, just like mine. It's tough to do. But yeah, very interesting knife. This is a hell of a musket. I'm pretty sure it's a musket. Right? I can stick my finger down there. There might be. No, that's definitely a rifle. So after doing some more research on the markings on the lock plate, it looks like this was a model 1816 flintlock that was converted to fire with percussion caps in 1834 by M.T. Wickham. M.T. Wickham was a government inspector and later a gunsmith out of Philadelphia who did quite a few of these 1816 conversions. There are very subtle cut marks on the lock pin as well as extra pins, and this kind of distinguishes it from the Springfield 1861, which looks very similar to this rifle, the 1861 being the standard issue of the Civil War. You can see on the left side of the barrel it's marked NJ, which means it was probably done as part of a batch for the state of New Jersey. They were a 69 caliber musket. Many of these conversions ended up being issued during the Civil War, and their barrels were also rifled as well. Yeah, so here's a look at how this bayonet looks. So it slides it around the front sight and off like that, and you can see this is kind of got a triangular shape with it's kind of a hollowed out triangle, so it's going to leave a nasty wound, and that's over a foot long, so that's a nasty weapon right there. So put it back on, it just slides over the barrel and twist like that. There you have it. pretty far out. Yeah. You can see how this would kind of take the place of a spear. You know, you can hold people at bay. Nice. Okay. Yeah, they got some other percussion-fired rifles. This one's got a little bit more fancier work on the grip here and on the lock plate and all that. This one's actually really nice and lightweight because the barrel is so thin. Some of these, like this one for example, it's smaller than a 50 cal, so probably like a, I don't know, 36 or something like that, but the barrel's about 10 millimeters thick, so this thing just weighs a ton. But it got a real nice tiger stripe maple stock, double triggers. This one also has a little bit of a engraving on the lock plate of like a horse or something like that. It's kind of cool. And this is a really neat one where it's got a side hammer. So the percussion cap nipple is on the side there instead of the top. I've not seen anything like this before. I guess it's not that uncommon, but yeah, this one's got a nice stock, little decorations here and there, patch box, another big heavy barrel, but actually a pretty short stock overall. So even with that deep curve in there, it's still actually fairly comfortable to shoulder. So, and our last blade here is a bayonet from a Gras rifle, which was the French service weapon from 1874 to 1886. The Gras rifle is one of the very first bolt-action rifles of its time, and was also one of the first to use a metallic cartridge. The spine of the bayonet bears an inscription, which states that it was made by the Saint Etienne Weapons Factory in 1879. You can see it kind of has a T-shaped cross-section, so it's got a very wide spine, which tapers down very rapidly to bring it to an edge. This makes the blade extremely stout and rigid, so combined with the fine point, it makes it very excellent for thrusting attacks. It also has a curved blade catcher type guard and a steel scabbard. I owe the Port Huron Museum a huge thank you. It was a great learning experience for me to be able to actually get my hands on some of these artifacts. Unfortunately, these items are not currently on display, but if you ever find yourself in the area, be sure to stop in. They have free admission and a lot of exhibits on Great Lakes maritime history. There are several additional sites to the museum, including Michigan's oldest lighthouse. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, be more Viking.